Batman the Animated Series was notable for including some really obscure comic book characters and giving them the spotlight. Unless you were a big comic book reader, chances are most viewers at the time would never have heard of Count Vertigo, Killer Croc, or even Ra's al Ghul. But no character's appearance was more surprising than that of Jonah Hex, a disfigured bounty hunter from the Wild West. Given that BTAS takes place in a nebulous time period that looks like the 40s, with some of the technology of the 1990s, there's no reason to expect a character from the 1800s to show up, and yet there he was. But before I talk about how he was used in the episode Showdown, let's first talk about who Jonah Hex is and his comic book origins. Once upon a time, DC Comics published more than just superhero comic books. There were horror comics, romance comics, war comics, and even western comics, and this is where Jonah Hex debuted. He first appeared in 1972's All-Star Western No. 10. He was a rugged, strong, silent type in the mould of Clint Eastwood's The Man with No Name. He wasn't a hero in the traditional sense, he was a bounty hunter that preferred taking in the crooks dead rather than alive, and he had a distinctive facial disfigurement that made him resemble a villain. Hex's disposition may have been rough, but he had a very clear sense of justice. For example, when a young boy who had idolised Hex was killed by outlaws in an explosive fire, Hex saw to it that those responsible died in the same way, even though it meant he wouldn't be able to claim the bounty on them. This sense of justice came about in his youth, as his good-for-nothing father had left him as collateral with an Apache tribe in order to secure passage to potential riches out west during the gold rush. His father promised to return within 6 months to pay the debt and reclaim his son, but he never came back. As such, Hex became the tribe's slave, and was regularly beaten. He only earned his freedom as a teenager when he rescued the tribe's leader from a mountain lion. While he gained most of the people's respect with his bravery, the chief's son, Notante, was resentful of him and left him to die in a conflict with another group. Of course, Hex being Hex, he successfully slaughtered everyone, but he didn't feel that he could return to the tribe. Around this time, the American Civil War broke out and Hex joined the Confederacy, mostly because he lived in the South. However, his time as a slave had made him uncomfortable with how the African Americans were being treated, and so he surrendered himself to the nearest northern base. He refused to give up any intel, but the soldiers figured out the Confederate camp's location from the distinctive red mud on his boots and raided it. As punishment for his lack of cooperation, the Northern general had Hex brought out in front of the Confederate men and handed him money to make it seem like he had betrayed them, which Hex did not take kindly to at all. For his insolence, he was put in a cell, one with an escape tunnel. The general had been ordered to treat the prisoners with dignity, which was expensive, but he was permitted to shoot those that tried to escape. So he dug the tunnel and left Hex to his own devices. Not realising the danger he was in, Hex released his fellow soldiers, but in the process got nearly all of them killed. Hex carried a deep shame for what happened and wore his old Confederate uniform as tribute to his fallen comrades, not because he supported what it stood for. Feeling he had nowhere else to go, Hex returned to the tribe that had raised him, where he sought justice for Notante's betrayal via trial by combat. There were very strict rules about this battle, but the most important one was that they could only use tomahawks, but Notante made sure that Hex's had been sabotaged. When faced with his own death and knowing Notante had cheated him a second time, Hex pulled out his knife and stabbed him in the chest. Hex demanded that Notante admit his guilt, but he stayed silent and died. As punishment for breaking the rules and killing the future leader of the tribe, they branded his face with the mark of the demon, a scar that would tell the world that he was a traitor. Hex popped up in a number of series, All-Star, Western, Weird War Tales, and even his own solo book, but Western comics' popularity had rapidly declined by the 1980s and each series was eventually cancelled. Having said that, it's clear that Hex was a character that DC just would not let go of, even if the audience wasn't quite there for him. Following Crisis on Infinite Earths, DC published a series called Hex in 1985, which saw the titular bounty hunter transported to the far-flung 21st century. Here, he became a post-apocalyptic warrior of sorts, a little bit like Mad Max, but that series only lasted 18 issues. It was an odd time for the character, but worth keeping in mind because I will come back to it later on. Hex eventually returned to his own time period where he lived to the age of 66, when he was gunned down in a saloon. Given his notoriety, his corpse was taken away stuffed and put on display at a fairground attraction, which is some beautiful commentary on the commodification of our modern era, but I don't want to get too sidetracked by that. Although it is worth noting that Hex did eventually come back briefly during the Blackest Night crossover as a zombie Black Lantern, but that was much later on. Now this brings us to what I'm sure you're all most interested in, his appearance in Batman the Animated Series. After the team finished their first order of BTAS episodes, there seemed to be a bit of bat fatigue among them. Bruce Timm, for instance, has spoken in interviews about how he wanted to expand his horizons and try new things. But then Fox went and ordered an additional 20 episodes, which was when the show was rebranded to The Adventures of Batman and Robin. One of the most striking things about these final 20 episodes is how tonally diverse they are. You had your traditional noir thrillers like A Bullet for Bullock, then you had screwball comedies like Harley's Holiday, and horror stories like Avatar. But probably the most left field episode is Showdown, which is primarily set in the Old West with very little Batman in it at all. Instead, the episode focuses on an aging Jonah Hex, who symbolises the old world, nearing the end of his life as the railroad comes to town. If you weren't aware of this, I recorded a director's commentary track for Showdown with Kevin Altieri, where he talked about the making of this episode, including how he co-wrote the story, and shared some rarely seen production artwork. I've linked to it in the info button if you're interested. Just pop on your copy of the episode and then watch the commentary track on your phone at the same time. I made a few of these and would love to make more, so if you're a BTAS superfan, definitely check those out. But back to Showdown. While Hex seeks Arcady Duval, a cruel man that had harmed women across a dozen states, he comes into conflict with Ra's al Ghul, who is trying to stop the advancement of the railroad and preserve the old way of life. And it's a perfect demonstration of Hex's character that ultimately he doesn't care about any of that. Duval is allied with Ra's. Ra's tries to stop him from claiming his bounty, so Hex is fully prepared to steamroll through Ra's and his army to catch his man. Duval is highly educated and a well-trained swordsman, but he is cruel and callous. He whips his own men when they don't work as quickly as he wants them to, and he has a habit of brutalizing women. He's also Ra's al Ghul's son. His cruelty makes him entirely unfit to be Ra's heir, but at the end of the day, he is still his boy. Ra's orders Duval to take care of Hex after he broke free and sabotaged Ra's Phoenix airship. While the two duelled, Ra's escaped, leaving Duval to his fate. For all his training, Duval is no match for the experienced Hex, who refuses Duval's attempts at a bribe. He may be grizzled and mean, but Hex has principles. At the same time, he is getting on in years, so he decides to spare Duval so that he wouldn't have to carry his corpse back to town. While Hex didn't have direct involvement with the Dark Knight in Batman the Animated Series, the two did meet during the Justice League Unlimited two-parter Once and Future Thing. In this story, Batman, Wonder Woman and Green Lantern find themselves transported back to the Old West after pursuing the time-travelling thief Kronos. While they only left a few moments after Kronos, the trio arrive a few months later than him, thanks to the screwy nature of time travel. In that time, Kronos found himself abducted by an outlaw, Tobias Manning, who used technology from the future to help him take over the town of Elkhorn. A much younger Jonah Hex is part of the posse that is at war with Manning, and they pair up with the Justice League to restore order. One scene that I think is worth mentioning comes when Hex casually remarks that, based on Batman's crazy-looking gun belt, they must be time travelers. When asked how he figured that out, he responds that he has lived an interesting life, which was a smart nod to the Hex comics of the 1980s. Hex's role in this episode isn't massive. He's part of an ensemble of Western characters, but it was great seeing him. Jonah Hex's inclusion in Batman the Animated Series wasn't about pushing the larger Batman mythos forward. It wasn't even a tease for a spin-off or the beginning of a new toy line. It was the kind of creative choice you can only really make when you're confident in your show and trust your audience to go along for the ride. And to their credit, the BTAS creative team were always willing to throw curveballs like this. Episodes that broke format, shifted genre, or explored characters that had nothing to do with Batman directly. Showdown is one of my favourite episodes, not because it's flashy or action-heavy, but because it has a clear sense of identity. It's a western through and through, and like many good westerns, it's about a man out of step with the world around him, someone who isn't trying to save the day or redeem himself, but just simply finish his job. Jonah Hex doesn't make speeches and he doesn't explain himself, he just does what needs doing and then moves on. That kind of character can be hard to fit into a shared universe, especially one as full of high-concept science fiction and colourful supervillains as the DCAU. But it works here because the show takes him seriously. It doesn't treat him like a joke or a novelty act. He's presented with the same depth and care as any of Gotham's rogues or allies. And that's probably why his small handful of appearances are still remembered today, decades later. In the end, Jonah Hex is a great example of the depth of the DC universe. He's someone who doesn't wear a mask, care about legacy, or even think of himself as a hero. He's messy, morally grey, and often driven by pride or revenge more than anything else. He does what he thinks is right and fair, even if it objectively isn't. And there's a strange kind of honour in that. He might not be the man you'd call for help, but if he shows up, you can bet the job will get done. And for a show like Batman the Animated Series, that kind of character fits in perfectly. Okay, that's it for this week's essay. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really enjoyed the video and have the means, please consider making use of the thanks button to send a buck or two my way, because every little helps. I offer channel memberships for $1.99 a month. This will get you early access to my weekly video essay, priority responses to your comments, members-only videos, custom emojis, and an icon on your profile indicating that you're one of my people. And special thanks to my channel members. Everyone who was a member at the time of this video's creation is listed on the screen right now. If you want to see your name amongst all these wonderful people, join the channel now. Next time, I'll be back on Friday to talk about a villain that a lot of people have been asking about for a while now. Yes, it's time to talk about Superman's arch-foe and the King of Metropolis, Lex Luthor. And next Monday it'll be time to return to the results of my latest Beware the Batman villain poll to talk about one of the more well-known villains from that series. We'll be talking about Killer Croc. Hope to see you then.